I'm super late to the party, but today I have finally got my Jade Summer Ohuhu collab set. I'm going to unbox it, share my first impressions, and color. And that was my initial plan. But let's be real, you've probably already seen dozens of unboxing videos. Let's jump right into the first impressions and coloring. Okay, so now let's take a look at the markers. First and foremost, these markers are not unique colors. If you already have a full set of Ohuhu markers, those will be duplicates. So this isn't the problem for me because I do not have the full set just yet, but I'm also quite sure I will have a few duplicates with this one. As for the case, the markers are held really securely in the case, which actually makes this a great set for traveling because everything just stays exactly where it's supposed to be. That said, the elastic loops are really tight. Getting the markers out and especially putting them back in, so that takes a little more effort than I would like to. So now let's talk about the color selection, because this is the whole reason I bought the set. What really impressed me is how thoughtfully the colors were selected. Instead of giving us just a bunch of random shades and colors, so they have grouped the colors into ready-made blending groups. Rather than trying to figure out which, 2, 3, or 4 markers blend nicely together, they have already done that work for us. And with this set, we have all of the colors present, and we get here a light, a medium, and a darker shade. Just these blending groups and color selections alone make the set worth it. And now, my friends, it's finally time to color. Get your markers ready if you want to color along with me. I'm going to start with the eye sockets because those will naturally be the darkest areas of the skull of the entire picture. By the way, I wanted to try something a little different in this video. I'm not going to talk through the entire coloring process like I usually do. I will still explain what I'm doing and why, but I'm also going to leave some quiet moments so that you can just, relax and enjoy coloring along with me. So, I want to share my first impressions of the paper. It's quite thick, and it surprised me that it has quite a bit of texture, which is not typically the case with marker paper. I think that's a really interesting choice for an alcohol marker set, and I'm really curious to see how well these markers blend on it. So my first concern is that the paper might absorb quite a bit of ink, but we'll find out as we go. And secondly, textured surface causes more wear on the marker nibs over time. It will not happen just after one picture, but after many pages, naturally the nib will be frayed probably. And thirdly, as I said, I'm not sure how markers will blend together on such kind of a rough paper. Anyway, for this skull, I'm going to start with my lightest colors first. I'm building everything up gradually. Actually, the blue, grey, and yellow color palette wasn't my first choice. Originally, I was thinking about using more of an earthy and muted green colors, but before I started coloring, I made a few quick colored thumbnails, and I just wasn't happy how that combination looked. So I changed my mind and went with this, cooler blue-grey palette paired with yellow instead. And I just wanted to share because I don't want you to think I always come up with the perfect color combinations right away, or not perfect but good color combinations right away. It's just trial and error. By the way, a little sneak peek at a future video. I have been asked if I could do a comparison between Ohuhu markers and Copic markers. I would absolutely love to. I have been using both brands for some time already, so I think I have a pretty good idea of their strengths and weaknesses. Of course, everything will be based on my own experiences, my own opinion, but I'm planning a really in-depth comparison, a really big video, so stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. Another nice touch about this set is that the swatch cards seem to be made from the same paper as the coloring book. I mean, honestly, that's chef's kiss. That's actually super thoughtful because it is always recommended to swatch markers on the same paper, and like if you have a swatch card on different paper, like you have to do double work. Also, I think this book could be a great idea for anyone who struggles like coloring really small areas. And if you think about it, whether it's just, you know, someone who's starting out, or maybe like a person has some kind of condition that makes, you know, detailed coloring difficult, I genuinely think these illustrations are a good place to enjoy coloring without like constantly worrying about like how you staying inside the lines, like fine details and whatnot. You know what? I'm actually starting to enjoy this paper. It's definitely a different experience from what I normally use, like the paper, but the paper handles the markers surprisingly well. Right now, I'm trying to blend the yellow smoothly into the white of the paper. Alright, as I start adding more color, I also want to gradually build up the shadows. I wish we had more coloring books with artworks like that, so if you know such books exist, please do let me know in the comment section. I really would appreciate that. I think there's so many cute and cozy coloring books out there, which are absolutely gorgeous, they are adorable. But this illustration has a completely different vibe. Like, it's mysterious, you know, more on kind of the darker side, I think. It also kind of reminds me of the True Detective. I don't know why, I don't even know if such things were in the True Detective. If you're coloring along with me, here is one little tip. When you're working on the feathers, try leaving a few tiny white gaps here and there. I like to think of it as letting the illustration breathe. I really like leaving a little bit of like untouched paper between colors, especially when I'm working with like more saturated colors. I think those little white spaces, or at least lighter spaces, keep the illustration from looking like too busy. And one more note about the paper, the markers layer beautifully on it. I can definitely see why Jade Summer Ohuhu chose this paper for this collab. While it doesn't feel like traditional, like typical marker paper, it performs quite well. Overall, now that I'm thinking about it, this set feels incredibly well designed. Just to name a few things. The really well curated color palette, the pre-made blending groups, organized swatch cards, also not always the case, beginner-friendly illustrations, I love that. The only thing that's left to test is bleed through. So I intentionally placed a sheet of paper behind this page, as you can see, so that we can check later how much ink, if any, made it through. And by the way, the markers are not co-branded. I think that would be such a cute and nice touch if they were, so I know that like Bobby Goods and the Kokowai ones are co-branded and they're really cute, stinking cute. This is me from the editing room. I was really enjoying this coloring book after I recorded the video. And I wanted to share a couple of pages that I finished while working on the editing. And now, time for background. I do not want to add any more details to the skull just yet. I would rather add the background first, so that I can judge how much contrast my main character still needs. Okay, and now a bit of criticism about this set. Since I'm coloring such a large area, this is normally where I personally would switch over to the chisel nib, because it gives you a much more even ink flow and coverage that is needed for such big surfaces. I'm actually a bit surprised that they chose brush nib and fine bullet nib for a coloring book this large. I would have expected a chisel nib instead. That said, I assume most people in the coloring community, specifically, actually prefer brush plus fine nibs. At the end of the day, it really comes down to your personal preferences. Okay, now that the background is in place, the skull definitely needs more contrast. These shadows aren't dark enough yet, let's fix it. The only thing I really want to avoid with this illustration is using pure black, because I believe it tends to dominate the entire illustration, and I don't want that. So the reason I chose blue and yellowish orangish colors is pretty simple. They are complementary colors, so they are positioned, they're sitting across each other on the color wheel. And I know they will work well together. Of course, choosing complementary colors is only part of the process. They still need to be balanced out and distributed really thoughtfully across the page. I find it really helpful to pick one color as the so-called accent color, and the second one as a supporting color. So here in my illustration, yellow is the accent color and blue is supporting it. I'm also limiting the amount of yellow so it stays the accent color. If you add both of them too much, like equally, they may kind of compete with each other. Again, please don't quote me on that. This is my understanding of the color theory, but I thought I would share. I don't want to repeat the exact same color pattern from the band across the skull here, so I'm adding a little more gray here to break things up. Now I'm noticing that the bottom of the page feels a little bit too bright. I think it steals the spotlight from the main character, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to darken the horn slightly and add some yellow color to help balance out the overall composition. I start by laying down a light gray base and then build up the darker tones on top of it. If you're coloring along with me, again, I definitely encourage you to leave a few small areas uncolored. Those little bits can make the illustration feel lighter and a bit more airy and kind of sketch-like. I really enjoyed that look. And now let's do the same on the other side. And I just walked around my desk to get a better angle, and I bumped into the camera. Sorry about that. Honestly, this whole YouTube thing is probably going to improve my skills, like, a lot. I'm constantly forced to draw from really weird positions because of the overhead camera that I would never choose otherwise. Okay, I will just think of it as an extra practice. I think one recommendation I've heard is practicing drawing lines and shapes, from different angles and in different directions, because it helps train the hand. Okay, I do want to deepen some of the shadows because they're still looking quite flat. Okay, off topic, I would love to learn drawing skulls properly someday. Really, like overall animal anatomy in general. But it feels like such a huge topic that I have been putting it off for quite a long time. I'm just too scared to start. But at some point, I'm pretty sure I will bite the bullet. Now I'm looking at this pattern near the bottom and it looks flat. I do not necessarily want to add more shadows, but I do want to introduce texture. I'm doing dots and making them irregular, so some smaller, some bigger, and mostly placing near edges and corners. And also adding a few small dots to the skull here and there, like to the feathers, to tie everything together. Actually, a few of those dots aren't standing out enough because I used the same marker, the same color, so I'm going to switch to a darker color so that they're a little more visible. There we go, much better, much better. I am loving this. No doubt, it's going to stay my favorite illustration in the entire book. Well, the koi fish page potentially might give it some competition. However, whoever illustrated this did an incredible job, and I'm really glad they decided to include it in the book. Okay, and now let's see if anything bled through. Oh wow, that's impressive. The paper is thick enough so that almost no ink came through, so there is just one dot. And even in the background where I layered quite a lot. That's better than I expected. Final thoughts. I really love the set. So again, the color selection is incredibly well thought out. I had an absolute blast coloring this page. Even though I wish the designs of other pages were a bit more diverse and a bit less plants and flowers, and I'm not gonna be saying like, hey, you should buy it or you should not, that's your decision, but if you want to see more Ohuhu content, I'm working on a really in-depth comparison between Ohuhu and Copic markers, so stay tuned and thank you so much for watching. Ciao!